Speedy no Herman This is Ask Joe number 182. Hello and welcome to Ask Joe number 182. That was a little reverse reverb action for you, courtesy of Gabe Miller here on the live chat. Suggested that I do, well, actually, to be fair, it wasn't Gabe who suggested that. I think it was Mario who suggested the record reverse, add reverb, and print the reverse again, which is a really fun trick. You should do it at some point in a mix. But then Gabe suggested taking that last note down another fifth or so. So it turned out really well. So in light of, Halloween's around the corner, it's October. Anyway, I've missed you. I've been gone a week. Took last week off. Stayed home but didn't work. Took my family to Dollywood. Never been to Dollywood. It's actually not surprisingly, I've heard it's fun, but it was pretty fun. I took Owen, who's 6, just turned 6 last week. Took him on his first roller coaster. He did not like it. See, the thing is, he's like in the 99th percentile for height, so he looks like he's about an 8 or 9-year-old, but he's only just turned 6, and so he's big enough to ride things. But anyway, as soon as we went around the first turn on the roller coaster, he was screaming, "I want to get off!" So I thought that was funny. Okay, so today, I'm going to get into your questions pretty quickly. I don't have a lot that I want to cover here. The one thing is, very, very soon, and depending on when you listen to this, it may have already happened, but very, very soon, I'm going to start a new series of videos on YouTube where we are going to mix a song together, okay? I believe we're going to call it Mix Together. Super clever name. And it'll be a series where we're mixing a song. You'll get the tracks. You'll be able to mix along with me. So yeah, it'd be a cool thing that I've not really done on YouTube for free. So it'll all be free to you and should be really fun, and I'm excited to knock that out. It should be in the next week or so. So pay attention. I believe if you're here live, it's going to be this Thursday. So be on the lookout for that. If you are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, you need to subscribe there. Go to YouTube and search for my name or Home Studio Corner and make sure you subscribe. And if you don't have the YouTube app for your phone, I didn't use it for years, and it's actually ridiculously handy. You can, obviously, you've been able to subscribe to channels for years. I've never done it, but based on what you watch, if you're watching the video, it brings in suggested videos of things you'd probably be interested in. And then you can go to another page and just see who that you subscribe to has a recent video that you haven't seen yet. So I've been putting out, you may have noticed, a lot more videos, usually 3 to 5 a week, and I don't always email about those or post them all on, I post them on Twitter and Facebook, but if you want to make sure you see them when they come out, subscribing in YouTube is a great way to do that. Also, if you subscribe to my email newsletter, about once a week or so, I'll send out an email with just kind of links to all the stuff I've put out as like a digest in case you missed something. So a couple of things there, and yes, it'll be nice and free. Okay, so before I jumped on to do this episode, I was asking all the lovely folks, and there's a bunch of people here live. I'm so thankful for you to be here. Folks who are here live on the stream, I asked them what they want me to rant about topic-wise, and there's a couple. But here, I'm going to use this one. This one's kind of interesting, from Stephanie Carlisle. And Stephanie said, rant about what irritates you about Nashville. So this is pretty interesting because, as you know, I've been doing a little bit more playing out in Nashville. I've been booking up some different writers' nights, and I've got another show coming up in about a month where I'll be the local artist of the week on a local radio station, and so they'll be playing my songs on the radio, and then we'll do a show that Friday night, and so it could be a good kind of way to get some exposure and move with that. But what's interesting is Nashville is such a unique town. As you probably know, it's Music City. It's a big country music capital. But there's it's also a pretty big capital for Christian music. And when I think about things that bother me about Nashville, so Nashville was based on, not the whole town, and I can't speak for the whole town, but my perception of Nashville is it's a songwriter's town, which is great. It means you go to any songwriter night in Nashville and you're going to hear, I've played songwriter nights at Corky's Barbecue, which is just a barbecue joint over in Brentwood on the corner of Old Hickory and Franklin Road. I've played there probably at least half a dozen times, and it's just a barbecue place. But even there, the people that show up and play are ridiculously good songwriters and musicians and artists. So you've got a saturation of lots of talent, but you've also got this industry where historically in Nashville, there are, and this is probably true in other cities, but specifically in Nashville, you've got songwriters and you've got artists. And occasionally, especially years ago, the artist would maybe write some songs, but the big hit songs usually came from these songwriters who may not even be great musicians, but they're just good at writing songs. So they would have publishing deals with these publishing companies. They'd write a song, and then they'd write lots of songs, and they'd pick some and they'd pitch them to record labels or directly to artists or to A&R representatives. And it's this whole kind of crapshoot of you write a bunch of songs, and then you hope you get picked by an artist to record your song on their album. And as you can imagine, with there not being nearly as much money in the record labels and record deals and things like that, there's everyone's looking for a way to save a buck. And one of those ways is a lot of artists writing their own music, or just there not being as many record deals and not being as big budgets and things like that. So for me, I get a little annoyed with Nashville and how many songwriters there are who want to be strictly songwriters. In 2016, they want to do what was like really, really popular and successful in like the 70s and 80s. That was a long time ago. Is it possible to still, if you get a number one hit, to make a ton of money and be super successful? Yeah, but it's not as likely, especially now. Do I think you should pursue that as one of the things you do? Yes. But to me, I think just with everything, you should treat everything like you're an entrepreneur yourself and find ways to make money directly instead of always waiting for an artist to pick up your song and produce it and record it and all that stuff. So I don't love that about Nashville, because I think it promotes this idea of if I just create excellence, then success will come to me, versus working for it and getting out there and actually making something happen. It tends to make you lean heavily on the system, and when the system's not working as well as it was a few decades ago, you're leaning on a pretty shaky system that just ends up a lot of disappointment and a lot of folks who could have made a name for themselves and could have had some cool success in other ways they didn't expect to have, but they're holding tight to this one way of writing songs and making money through having big artists record their songs on hit radio. So that's probably fewer and fewer people, but it's still a pretty prominent thing here in Nashville, and you still have people flocking to the town every week that are wanting to make that their dream. And I just think, honestly, I feel like you should dream bigger. I don't want my dream to be just to write a song that somebody else records. As a musician, I want to write great songs, record them myself, and then have lots of people like it. But I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit selfish and narcissistic, which is partially true, but that's what I got. Boom. There you go. That wasn't my best rant, so forgive me. I'll make up for it by giving really good answers. I'm off my game. It's been a week, so cut me some slack. All right, so what questions do we have over here in the chat? I've got one in Facebook I want to pull in real quick from Daniel. Daniel says, how do you know when to walk away from a finished track? I just finished an EP, and it sounded great on my system. I played the song on all kinds of other speakers and headphones, and the levels were all there okay, but it never sounded as good as my main system. I get that my ears are biased to what I was mixing with, but does this happen with you too? Do you get to the point where you just can't do anything else but without ruining things? Really good question. So for me, if I work on something and it sounds amazing in my studio and it doesn't sound amazing anywhere else, to me that's a red flag. It could be fine, but usually that means it's not great, because the biggest thing you can do is pull up your favorite album and listen to it in your studio. Your favorite record, whatever that is, the one that you tend to listen to a lot in your car, on your earbuds or whatever, where you're used to hearing it in other environments, and listen to it in your system. Does it sound good? If it doesn't, if an album you know sounds amazing does not sound amazing in your studio to you, there's your problem. Now, does that mean you need to change your studio? No. I mean, honestly, it doesn't mean you need to change anything other than your perspective of you need to make your mixes sound closer to what the pro mixes sound like in your studio. And in turn, over time, as you get better and better at that, that will translate to those mixes sounding consistently good in all places. That said, I mean, I mix on these old M-Audio EX66 monitors that sound really good to me. And there's on the one hand, my mixes sound best in here because I don't have as good of a playback environment anywhere else. You know, Apple earbuds, they're Apple earbuds, right? I mean, they only sound so good. Play it on my, in the car. It definitely doesn't sound better in the car. Play it on the little Bose thing we have in our living room, and it sounds a little bit better, but ultimately it sounds best in here. So on the one hand, it could be that you need to learn your speakers and learn how to mix on those better. On the other hand, it could just be that you just have really good speakers and it is going to sound best there. So I've kind of given you both ends of the spectrum. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Vinny says, a couple technical questions. Are you streaming to YouTube, Facebook as well as YouTube? No, I'm just streaming to YouTube. That is it. And what camera am I using? It's a Logitech. It's like the main Logitech webcam. It's like $100. Sorry, I thought, let's keep them audio related. But let's see. Here's one from Cesar. Says, do you have any experience doing volume and panning automation before EQ and compression? Or do you always stick to a static mix and do compression and do automation at the end? Cesar, if you watch a lot of my stuff, I don't do a lot of automation, especially volume automation. I do some, but the bulk of what I do is on the individual tracks, on the audio itself, using clip gain. So I'm doing it actually before EQ and compression. I used to think that was a bad thing because you're changing the amount of volume that's going into the compressor, for example, but then I realized, why would I not want a consistent volume going into my compressor so I get a consistent type of compression coming out of it? To me, that just makes sense. So it's easier for me. It's more visual, and it keeps me from trying to make a compressor do more than it's supposed to do. What I mean is, if there's a vocal, I wish I could show you on the screen right now. If there's a vocal that she sings 3 notes, and the middle note is really loud, and the front and the first and third words are really quiet. Well, you could use a compressor and have the compressor turn the loud part down until all 3 are about the same. And that can work. But sometimes you can get the volume thing right, but then the tone just sounds weird. The compressed part sounds too compressed, or it's compressing too much or too often, and you don't like the sound that the vocal's giving you. In those situations, after trying a few different ways of compressing it, if it's just a big volume difference, that compression just has to work overtime to tame the volume, I'll go in and actually take that second word and bring it down in volume until it visually looks about the same volume as the other 2. That's one of the cool things. You can do that visually, and you're usually spot on because literally the waveform corresponds to volume. So if they're exactly the same height, theoretically exactly the same volume. So that's the way that I go about doing it. And then will I ride a fader occasionally on a vocal? Yes. Or occasionally on I've got one song I was mixing earlier today where the organ track needs to be ridden up and down. And so I'll do that with the volume fader. But it's a lot like the organ, really good organ players will ride their volume pedal up and down to swell in and out. I play the organ part. I don't and can't do that, so I just do it with automation after the fact. Here's a question from Dave. Says, is it better to get a 3-polar pattern mic or to get 3 separate mics? It's a good question. It's kind of a loaded question because I tend towards have 3 different mics just in general than having one mic, because if those are the 2 choices, forgetting polar patterns for a second, if the choice is one really good mic, like $1,000 mic, or 3 $330 mics, I go for the 3 $330 mics and make them very different. A ribbon, a dynamic, and a condenser, for example, like a Cascade Fathead, an SM7B, and then a large diaphragm condenser like a Shure or something that's in kind of that price range, or a Rode NT1A. To me, those will give you 3 wildly different sounds, and that could be cool. Now, for polar patterns, would you rather have 3 polar patterns or 3 separate mics? So to answer your question, if you're assuming like I have a cardioid mic, an omni mic, and a bidirectional mic, figure 8 mic, I've never owned a mic that was only omni. To me, that seems like such a a usage I would rarely use, especially in a home studio environment where it's not the best sounding spot, so you tend to not want to pick up a lot of the room. So an omnidirectional mic is going to pick up probably more bad than good. I tend to go directional on just about everything. So for me, having the option to go omni is a good option. Just I like to have that option, but not my only option. So I tend to like microphones that give me, or at least one microphone that allows me to switch the polarity or the polar pattern of the mic itself. Have I used that function very much? Have I used the Omni function on a mic anytime in the last 7 years? I can't think of maybe once where I was recording people standing around the microphone in like a gang vocal thing. But for the most part, no, I don't ever do it. And then having a figure 8 mic that picks up front and back, the only reason I like those is I use it for tom mics to kind of cut out the bleed from the drums on the side. That works a little bit. And then if you're doing some sort of like bloom line or what is it called? Mid-side miking, which I haven't done in years. I mean, it's been probably 6 years since I've done any sort of mid-side miking just because I don't like it. It's too much work. I'd rather just set up the mic, point it at the thing, and have it sound good. So I'm not as big on polar patterns, but I would say it's nice to have at least one mic that lets you switch between them. So if you have a situation come up where you're recording a choir and you really only can bring one mic and the choir is really big and they're surrounding the microphone and you'd like to pick up everything, that's a situation where that would be nice to have. Otherwise, I'm a lot more, 90% of the time, the stuff I'm recording is with a directional microphone. So I'd probably rather have 3 even directional microphones that have different sounds to them versus 3 that have different polar patterns. Good questions. A lot of good questions coming in. George says, have you ever made a song by printing every effect straight to your DAW without any other interference and then just only mix volumes? I've not, because that seems like a waste of time. However, I know Pro Tools has this new thing where it will print everything that's on your, and then like remove the plugins and make them disappear so you just have volume. I think that's fine. To me, that's not, I don't see much of a point. I know Graham Cochran has talked about doing that some. I just don't see the point. Mixing to me is really, it's all about levels and panning from the beginning, and then I throw in EQ and compression and effects as needed. But really, the bulk of the decisions are happening on that front end when I'm just setting levels and panning. So I don't see any real point to have all the, it's almost backwards. To have all the effects in place and then set levels doesn't make sense, because what am I going to do with the EQ is based on the volume of that particular track I'm EQing. If it's louder, it's going to be EQ'd different than if it's quieter, typically. So that kind of tends towards this concept of making every single track sound amazing in solo by itself and then just blending them together. But speaking from experience, and you've probably heard this 1,000 times before, that's not a great way to get a good mix. Having each thing sound good by itself doesn't mean they're going to sound good together. It's kind of like if you wanted to put together a band where every musician was like a prodigy, ridiculously talented solo artist who could just play, like the bass player could just play all these pops and slaps and these riffs and licks and stuff that are just amazing. And then the keyboard player is just playing all this crazy fancy stuff, and the guitar player is shredding up a storm, and the drummer plays fills every 4 beats. And as you can imagine, that doesn't, even though they're all awesome in their own right, all of that combined together is just a massive noise. It's not musical. Same thing. There's no reason to solo each of your tracks and make sure, I want to make sure this shaker track sounds amazing by itself. Doesn't matter, because no one will ever hear it by itself unless it happens to be by itself in a section of the song that's different. But for most things, it only matters what it sounds like in context with everything else. So that should let you off the hook, because to me, it saves you a lot of time. You don't have to put an EQ on every track and EQ everything. You only have to EQ the stuff that needs it. And that makes life so much simpler, in my opinion. Randall says, what tactics do you use to get studio clients? Do you have an ongoing business strategy? In addition to studio clients, are you submitting cues to film, TV, libraries for sync placement? To answer the second question, no, I'm not doing the submitting stuff to sound libraries. I should. It's just one of those many things that is a good idea to do. I hosted a panel back in the spring at an event out in California that some of you might have come to, the Audio Bloggers Live that Ronan and Chris Murphy put on. And the panel I was leading was a bunch of people in the music placement world. They worked for, one was a guy who actually does the placement, actually I forget the title, and now it's ridiculous that I can't remember. Essentially, he picks the songs that are used in shows like The Walking Dead and things like that, and then kind of guys who head up publishing companies that represent the artists who send the songs to the people. Anyway, those are things that are good ideas to do. I just haven't, and I probably should. Just haven't gotten there. Your other question was, what tactics do you use for getting studio clients? For me, honestly, lately, as of the last year or so, it's been mostly Home Studio Corner as my tactic for getting clients. So Home Studio Corner is a business in its own right. It's its own business entity, but as a platform, as a way of showing what I know and can do as an engineer, it actually ends up attracting a lot of people. There are a lot of people here. I don't see anybody on the chat right now, but there are several who have hired me in the last month or so to mix a song, master a song, record a guitar part on a song. 2 weeks ago, the guy wanted us to track everything, like drums, bass, guitar, or drums, guitar, keys on several songs. And that all came from having a presence in Home Studio Corner where people see and experience me. It may take them, they may watch my videos and follow me for a couple years before they decide, it might be cool to hire him. And I don't push it very often where I'm saying, hey, come work with me. It's just more organic. They hear me maybe talk about clients occasionally, and they see a video where I do a mix and they like the way it sounds. And so they decide to hire me because they're not quite ready to mix, things like that. So am I saying you need a Home Studio Corner to get clients? No, it's just that's been one way that's actually gotten me. It wasn't my intent to get clients through Home Studio Corner. It just happened. So are there ways, bigger picture, for more applicable to everybody, are there ways that you've gotten clients that you weren't trying to get clients? If so, pursue that. Go down that path, because you're more likely to get more business that way than trying to come up with a way of doing it that sounds good to you, that theoretically might work, or a way that someone else has done that's worked. Find what's worked for you and really double down on that. You can also do other things. You can start a website and put yourself out there and create your own brand that builds awareness about you and your studio and get business that way. But if, for example, I worked with, there's an artist named Brooke Wagner, really talented songwriter. She's done a lot of touring. She's played with folks like, she's been in Jack White's band. She's played with John Foreman. I just saw her 2 weeks ago, and she was producing a album for an artist, and had some things fall through, and hired me to engineer all the sessions, and actually couldn't even do the drum session. I had another commitment, so I referred her to a friend, but she had me engineer everything else, and then I asked her if I could mix it, and she let me mix it. And the whole reason we met was she's married to a guy I knew from college who's friends with one of my better friends, and she was getting into Pro Tools and needed help, and my buddy referred her to me, and I gave her my Understanding Pro Tools videos that I had made back then, just gave them to her for free to help her get started. So then like a year and a half later, she calls me up needing someone to engineer. So those are, that's how I got a gig. So leaning into connecting with local artists. I didn't think she would ever hire an engineer because I thought she was just an artist, but turns out she's doing production stuff and has reached out to me from time to time. So that's an example. I posted on Craigslist once offering to have people come in and record a guitar vocal of their song, just a quick demo for free, just to kind of see what would happen. And nobody, it was a one-day thing, like 1 day only, free session, come on in. And nothing happened from it. So then I just forgot. I said, okay, that didn't work. I'll move on. And then about a week later, somebody saw my post and said, hey, I know I missed the deadline, but could you record my song for me? And I said, record it for you? And they said, well, yeah, you linked to some of the songs you've done in your studio. I really like your voice and your guitar playing. I'm a songwriter. I'm not a great, back to what I was ranting about before, I'm not a great musician, but I'd love for you to just play and sing my song so I can have a demo to pitch to artists and things like that. So I said, okay, I get that wasn't what I was planning to do, but sure, I'll do that. And I've told this story before, but then I sent it to him. He loved it. And within 45 minutes, I got an email from his friend who said, hey, you just did a song for my buddy. I've got like 50 songs. How many can you do for me? And so that's been an ongoing relationship with him. So if I was really looking to double down on getting some client work to bring in some revenue or meet new people, I could lean into one of those avenues of specifically those people, songwriting communities that want demos, is a community I didn't really think would want to pay to have someone actually play and record their songs, but it is. So lean into things that have worked for you in the past, and if you've had nothing work for you, then lean into stuff that's worked for other people and just keep trying it till you hit on a few that work for you. It's good, just general business advice. It's good to take advice from people, but it's best to only take advice to the point of finding what works for you and then really double down on that. Carlos says, if you had, the chat just keeps jumping on me, if you had to move on the other side of the earth, what would you bring with you to make music? As in recording and mixing. I'm assuming I'm going to answer the question as if I could only bring what I could like pack in my suitcase. I'd bring a laptop, a small interface, a single microphone, and I'd carry on a guitar. Probably have to be an acoustic guitar. And I could get a lot done with that. It's a fun question. Mark says, do you often add more than one reverb or delay to a vocal track? I don't usually, occasionally I do, but I don't usually add more than one reverb. It's usually just one or the other, but it's pretty regularly where I'll add a reverb and a delay, both intentionally because I thought the song calls for it. The only time I'll add more than one delay is if I want a specific, like a timed delay, like a quarter note or half note or eighth note delay, in addition to a slapback delay. And those are doing two separate things, and that's one situation where I will have two. Lukshay says, do you get away from a mix for a few days and listen to it with fresh ears? Do you recommend doing that for every mix? I do recommend doing that for every mix. Do I do it for every mix? No. It's one of those where ideally it'd be great, but in the real world, sometimes you just got to get stuff done. I do like to step away, even if it's just to run up and make a cup of coffee and come back in. Or the best thing I've done lately is one of two things. Take my crappy speakers and listen to the song on there and mix on there for a while. Or if I'm really close to being done, I upload it to I export it to Dropbox. I load it up on the Dropbox app on my phone and listen with my Apple earbuds and go for a walk or something and listen there. If nothing stands out to me as awful, then I'm in good shape. So yes, I think stepping away is always good if you can do it. And honestly, you really should work that into your scheduling. And I'm trying to do a better job of that, but I'm still not great at it. Johnny Lipsham, my buddy from Scotland, which, by the way, Johnny, I've said this a million times. I don't know when and how, but we got to hang out. I need to come to Scotland, and we will get a pint. Johnny says, can you briefly outline your rationale for backwards mixing? Good question. So this is something I've been talking about for a couple years. It's this concept of backwards mixing. The idea is every track in your session goes through a bus. So my mixing template has drums, bass, electric, acoustic, keys, vocals, background vocals. Those are my buses. I will route all my tracks to one of those. If I need another one because there's a bunch of strings and it makes more sense to put them through their own bus than through the keys bus, which is what I would normally do, I'll do that. So those aren't set in stone, but once I've picked out what buses I need, everything gets routed through one of them. Then I set the levels on everything, get a good static mix, and then I tend to, and I've changed this a little bit in the last year, but the idea is I will do some EQ on the drum bus, maybe some compression on the drum bus, and then I'll work my way back. And does anything else need individual EQ? This is I call it backwards mixing because so many people mix frontwards. That's not a word, I know. Where they will, they'll take a song and they'll just literally start from left to right in their session. Kick, EQ compress, snare, EQ compress, toms, EQ compress, and they'll go all the way through like that. It's kind of back to what I was saying before, where they might make the things sound really, really good by themselves, but it's not really helping in the mix. And it can be a big waste of time. Here's an example. Let's say the snare is got this kind of general ringing of kind of a whoo, but you hear it on the snare mic, you hear it on the tom mics, you hear it on the overhead mic, and you hear it on the room mics. Well, guess what? If you just EQ out that frequency on your drum bus, you don't have to do it 6 other times on the individual EQs on each track. That's one way where it just saves time. Also, things like on drums in general, I tend to find myself cutting around 400 hertz because that tends to get rid of some of the boxy sound of drums, and it works on kick drum, on snare drum, on toms, on overheads, on rooms. So I do it on my big drum bus and save myself a bunch of time and get it closer to the sound I want. Now, are there ways that I've moved away from backwards mixing in the last year? Yes, and here they are. Basically, if I pull up the tracks and I'm doing my static mix and something's just bothering me, there's a bass that's just too muddy, there's a snare drum that's ringing too loud, there is a vocal that's jumping out of the mix too much for me to even enjoy the static mix, then I'll go do something about that. If the snare drum's ringing, I'll put an EQ on that specific snare where the ringing's happening the most, and I'll EQ out those frequencies. If the bass is too muddy, I'll go in and take away around 120 hertz to soften it up so it doesn't hurt my ears to listen while I continue to do my static mix. If the vocal is jumping out and is too loud in spots, I'll slap a compressor on there and tame those loud parts down, even as a temporary solution, so I can go back and actually do the static mix. What I don't want to do when I mix is to jump in and start really EQing and compressing and using plugins too soon, because you miss the creative part of setting levels and panning, and you're always kind of going back and forth between, oh, I didn't set these levels right, to, oh, I need to EQ this. So I like to keep those as separate as possible. But if there are things that are jumping out and kind of raising their hand saying, hey, I need you to pay attention to me, something's wrong with this track, it needs to be fixed, I'll do those fixing things earlier than probably I would have said a year ago with backwards mixing. Stian is here on the chat. We may now begin. I'm kidding. We've been going for a while. Let's see. There were some more questions I got to scroll back up to find. Here we go. Don Bernhard says, do you set your delay and reverb strictly to the tempo of the song, quarter or eighth note, or do you simply go by feel? With delays, almost always it's just set to the tempo of the song. So quarter note, eighth note, occasionally 16th note. Even if I'm doing a slapback delay, sometimes 16th note of the beat feels about right. Sometimes a straight 100, 120 millisecond slapback delay feels right. So I'm on the fence. I'm kind of half and half there. For reverb, I don't pay attention to the tempo of the song. I know some people say, like, have the reverb die out. You know, if you hit the snare and it goes to the reverb, have that die out before the next snare hit. That's just too nerdy for me. I just do what sounds good. So yeah, reverb does not, there's no attention to tempo there. Tom says, do you use strip silence? I'm not sure what it's called in Studio One on vocals and drums. Essentially, it's not called strip silence. I forget what it's called. It's called strip silence, apparently. I don't. The idea is if you have a vocal where he's only singing in certain sections, do you automatically remove all the audio between vocal phrases? And on the toms, remove all the spots where the toms aren't playing so you don't get any extra bleed. I don't do that by default because by default, 9 times out of 10, it's not bothering me. Whatever's going on with that particular track, I'm not hearing the bleed or I'm not hearing any of the extra stuff. I mean, there was a song I mixed last week or the week, well, not last week, but the week before, where when I soloed a vocal to edit something or to move something that was a little off timing wise, I heard him, he finishes singing a line and then his cell phone rings. Or like there's a text message alert, and it's as plain as day in the vocal track. But when I stopped and listened back to the mix, I couldn't hear it. Now, should I go edit that out? Maybe, but I couldn't hear it in the mix, so I actually just moved on. I'm very minimal when I do mixing, not because I'm lazy. It's just I only want to do things that matter. And so stripping silence only matters if there's some bleed that I'm getting. So, for example, this morning I was mixing a song where there was a lot of bleed of the snare coming into the tom mic. So I stripped everything but where the toms were being played on that particular song. But I don't do that by default because it's a lot of work that 9 times out of 10 isn't necessary. Big Al Collins says, I was asked today what mic is best for recording harmonica. I've only used what I've got here, but is there one? I've never used the green bullet, but I mean, that seems to be, at least for playing through an amp, an awesome choice. I've only recorded harmonica maybe once or twice. Condenser was awful. It picked up every sound, every breath noise, every awkward sound that comes out of harmonicas, which can be pretty awkward. So I switched to a dynamic, and it worked a lot better. So I would generally say dynamics are pretty good. Now, maybe I was just too close to the mic, but I tend to want right there. Like that's just how you see him play it. So that's how I did with the dynamic, and it worked great. Here's a follow-up point. Johnny commented in the chat that in jazz, good old jazz music, some bleed can actually be useful, especially in the drums. So yeah, if you go and cut everything out that's not being played, you can almost end up with almost a sterile sound. So for rock, it may be that you're getting a little bit of kind of your room sound, your overhead sound from the tom mics, and by removing them, it gets too clean or something. So it's just a matter of every song is different. But follow-up question says, do I use noise gates? No, I don't. And if I do, occasionally, I don't have them turn things all the way down. I have them turn it down by 10 to 18 dB or so. For example, my voice that you're hearing right now on the podcast or even live on the stream, I've got some sort of expander on there that just turns it down when I'm not talking. But it doesn't mute it, it just turns it down several dB, so it doesn't sound like my voice got muted between phrases, because that sounds awkward. It just sounds like it's a quiet room. It's a fun trick that makes my not-so-quiet room sound more quiet than normal. All right, Jessica, what is your opinion on parallel compression? I like it when regular compression isn't working. If I try a few different tricks to just regularly compress something and that's not working, then I might try parallel compression. All right, I gotta go. That's all the time I got. See ya.